Okay, let's dive in. We're looking at the Uinta Mountains today, part of the Rockies, which mostly run north-south.
Right, a classic Rocky Mountain trend.
But then you see the Uintas on a map, and boom, they just shoot straight east-west. It's, well, it's different.
It really stands out, doesn't it?
Totally. So what's the story there? Why do they break the mold like that? And what kind of secrets are hiding in those mountains because of it?
Well, it's fascinating, and it goes way, way back. That east-west direction isn't just random. It's actually tied to something incredibly old, a feature called the Cheyenne Belt.
Cheyenne Belt. Never heard of it.
It's this ancient scar in the Earth's crust formed when huge land masses collided almost 2 billion years ago. Think of it like an old seam or zone of weakness.
2 billion. Wow.
Yeah, really deep time. And that old weakness basically set the stage, kind of directed the forces when the Laramide orogeny happened much later.
The Laramide. That's the mountain building event that made the Rockies, right? Around, 70 to 50 million years ago?
Exactly. So those ancient structures, billions of years old, influenced how these relatively younger mountains were pushed up. The Uintas basically followed that pre-existing east-west grain.
So the mountains are youngish, but they're following instructions from, the Earth's deep history. That's kind of wild.
It is, and it's not just their angle. They sit at this really interesting spot, almost like a hinge, connecting with the Wasatch Range that runs north-south to the west.
Ah, okay. I see that on the map.
And then they sort of merge with other trends further east, so they're a structural pivot point in a way.
A structural hinge. I like that. It makes sense. It influences how all these huge forces are distributed across the whole mountain system.
Precisely. It shows how interconnected everything is, geologically speaking. And speaking of deep time, you can actually see some incredibly ancient rocks right at the surface in the Uintas.
Older than the mountains themselves, you mean?
No, much older. We're talking about the Red Creek Quartzite.
Right. I saw that mentioned. Where do you find that?
Mostly in the northeastern part of the range. Places like Gosselin Mountain, Jesse Ewing Canyon. These rocks are over 1.7 billion years old, possibly even older.
That's hard to even comprehend.
It really is. And they weren't always quartzite. They started out as things like sandstone, shale, limestone, laid down layer by layer.
And then cooked.
Exactly. Buried deep, subjected to immense heat and pressure metamorphism, transforming them into the hard quartzite we see today. Finding them exposed is like opening a window directly into the Precambrian eon.
Before complex life really took off. Amazing. And then there's the main bulk of the mountains, the Uinta Mountain Group, the UMG.
Yeah, that's the core.
Yeah.
These are mostly metasedimentary rocks too, but younger than the Red Creek Quartzite. Formed between about 700 and 770 million years ago in the Neoproterozoic era.
So still incredibly old.
Definitely. These were deposited as sediments, sand, mud, silt in a huge, slowly sinking basin called the Uinta Trough. Probably a shallow marine environment.
They built up.
Massively. We're talking about a total thickness of somewhere between 13,000 and maybe even 24,000 feet of sediment, just layer after layer.
That's almost 5 miles thick.
It's immense. And then during that Laramide mountain building event, this entire massive stack of rock, this basin, was basically squeezed, folded, and thrust upward.
Flipped up, as in.
Exactly. It's a process called geological inversion. What was once a low basin became this high mountain range, a pretty dramatic reversal.
So that ancient basin became the backbone of the Uintas we see today. You mentioned folding. I read about the Uinta anticline. Is that the main fold?
That's the one. Think of it as a giant upward bulge or wrinkle in the rock layers, but it's not perfectly symmetrical.
Oh, sorry.
It's asymmetrical. The crest, the highest point of the fold, is actually shifted towards the north side. So the northern flank dips down much more steeply than the southern flank.
Ah, okay. That explains the terrain differences.
It does. And all that bending and pressure didn't just fold the rocks, it broke them too. Created huge fault systems.
Faults running along the edges and through the middle.
Yep. Big ones bounding the range, like the North Flank Fault and the Uinta Fault. The Uinta Fault in particular has seen massive movement, something like 34,000 feet of vertical displacement.
Whoa. That's a serious break.
Absolutely. The South Flank has faults too, but generally with less displacement. That asymmetry in the folding really dictated where and how the rocks fractured.
These mountains definitely have a dramatic geological story. But what about the softer features, the lakes and the valleys? That wasn't the folding, was it?
No, that's mostly the work of ice. Much more recently, during the Pleistocene epoch, the last major ice age.
Glaciers.
Huge glaciers covering the high country. They acted like giant bulldozers and sculptors.
Carving things out?
Exactly. They carved out those characteristic U-shaped valleys, gouged deep basins that filled with water to become lakes. There are hundreds of them. And they left behind piles of rock and debris called moraines when they melted back.
It must have looked completely different then.
Totally glaciated. What's really interesting, though, is that the Uintas are the most poleward mountain range in the lower 48 states to rise above 13,000 feet but have no glaciers today.
Huh. So the glaciers are all gone.
All gone. Scientists call it a relict landscape. It gives us a unique chance to study how landscapes and ecosystems bounce back after the ice disappears.
Like a natural lab. Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have this incredible, ancient, dynamically shaped landscape. Let's shift to the people. Humans have been part of this picture for a long time too, right?
Oh, a very long time. The archaeological evidence points to people being in and around the Uintas for at least 12,000, maybe 13,000 years.
Wow. Continuous.
We see a succession of different cultures adapting over millennia. You have the early Paleo-Indians, then various groups from the Archaic period, followed by the Fremont culture, and then more recently the ancestors of the Ute and Shoshone people.
A long history of adapting to this place.
Definitely. Adapting to changing climates, changing resources. It's a story of resilience.
Start way back. Paleo-Indians, these are the folks at the end of the Ice Age, hunting mammoth and stuff.
That's them. Roughly 13,000 to 8,500 years ago. Highly mobile groups, focused on the big megafauna that roamed the area as the glaciers retreated.
Like near the ancient lakes.
Yeah, probably hunting near the edges of Lake Bonneville. We find their distinctive spear points, Clovis, Folsom, Haskett points in the region.
And they moved around a lot.
Seemingly so. What's really cool is that sometimes the obsidian, the volcanic glass they used for their tools, came from sources hundreds of miles away.
Shows they had big territories or trade networks, even back then.
Exactly. Extensive connections.
Okay, so the megafauna disappear. Then come the archaic peoples. How did their life change?
They adapted by broadening their diet. This is from about 8,500 to 2,000 years ago. Instead of just big game, they hunted smaller animals, gathered a much wider variety of plants.
Using the whole landscape.
Right. They developed what archaeologists call seasonal rounds, moving up into the mountains in the summer for berries and high country game, then down to lower elevations at other times for roots, seeds, maybe winter shelter, like using the mountains as a vertical pantry.
Smart. Do we find their sites?
We do. Campsites, rock shelters. American Fork Cave shows evidence of bighorn sheep hunting. Wolf Springs seems to have been a family camp area. We find different types of projectile points stemmed and notched, plus ground stone tools for processing plants, evidence of basketry.
A really adaptable lifestyle.
Yeah.
And then after the archaic, the Fremont culture appears, they seem a bit different. Farming involved.
Yeah, that's a key characteristic of the Fremont. Roughly 8,400 to maybe 1,300 or 1,350. They started practicing horticulture, growing corn, beans, squash.
So they settled down more.
Partially. It seems to have been a really flexible strategy. They combined farming with continued hunting and gathering. They didn't rely only on crops. They lived in scattered farmsteads, small villages, sometimes using pit houses, building granaries to store food. Some larger villages, like Baker Village, might have been centers for ceremonies or trade.
And they had distinctive stuff, like pottery.
Very distinctive, a specific type of grayware pottery, coiled basketry, unique moccasins. And their rock art is really iconic.
The trapezoidal bodies.
Exactly. Those human-like figures with trapezoidal bodies. You see fantastic examples in places like Dinosaur National Monument or McConkey Ranch.
Did they use the high Uintas too? Or just the basin?
Oh, they were definitely up high. There's evidence in the eastern Uintas around 11,000 feet of these ephemeral brush structures.
Brush structures.
Yeah.
Like temporary shelters.
Probably. Likely logistical hunting camps used seasonally, maybe by male hunting parties. It shows they had a planned, significant use of the high country, not just sticking to the lowlands.
Interesting. But then, around 1300, things changed for the Fremont. They seemed to disappear from the record in some areas.
Yeah, there's a definite shift. The most likely driver seems to be climate change. Things got colder and drier. That would have made farming much more difficult and less reliable.
So what happened to them? Did they just leave?
It was probably complex. Some groups might have moved away. Others might have adapted by returning to a more mobile hunting and gathering lifestyle. It's also possible they were gradually absorbed into the Numic-speaking groups, the ancestors of the Utes and Shoshone, who were expanding into the region around that time.
Right, the Ute and Shoshone. They were the dominant groups when Europeans first arrived.
Yes, from about 1300 onwards. The Utes, particularly bands like the Timpanogats and the Uinta Utes, were prominent in the Uinta Basin and surrounding mountains. Shoshone groups were more concentrated to the north.
And they were primarily hunter-gatherers.
Highly mobile ones. They followed seasonal patterns, hunting deer, elk, bighorn sheep. Bison became important later, especially after they acquired horses. They also fished and gathered a huge variety of plants, roots, seeds, berries, pine nuts. Their shelters were often temporary, like tipis.
The horse must have changed everything.
Completely transformative. They likely got horses sometime in the 1600s. It massively increased their mobility.
Made bison hunting way easier.
Much more effective, yeah. Led to adopting some Plains Indian cultural traits. Horses became symbols of wealth, status.
But downsides, too.
Definitely. Increased mobility also meant more potential for conflict between groups. There are accounts of Utes raiding groups like the Paiutes for captive to trade, partly fueled by the desire for European goods. The Uinta Basin, though, became a real heartland for these equestrian Ute bands.
And we can still see traces of all these people on the landscape today, besides the artifacts.
Absolutely. The rock art is probably the most visible legacy. Amazing panels of petroglyphs, carved images, and pictographs, painted images.
Fremont, Ute, maybe archaic.
Primarily Fremont and Ute, though some geometric forms could potentially be much older, maybe archaic. Places like Dinosaur National Monument, McConkey Ranch, Cub Creek, McKee Springs, they're hot spots. You see those Fremont figures. But also later Ute art, like more naturalistic depictions of horses and hunting scenes. Jones Hole is another key area. There are estimates of over 25,000 individual images just within Dinosaur National Monument.
That's incredible. And those high-altitude camps you mentioned.
Yeah, the brush structures up around 11,000 feet. Those seem to span from Fremont times possibly into the post-contact era. They really show a long-term planned use of the high mountain resources.
So not just rock art, but actual living sites, tool finds.
Right. Archaeologists find Paleo-Indian points, archaic hearths and tools, storage pits in places like the Ashley National Forest, and later stuff too, like late prehistoric or Ute triangular arrow points, and a type of pottery called brownware. It's a continuous story written on the land.
And it's important to remember this isn't just ancient history, right? These places still matter to tribal communities today.
Critically important. These sites, these landscapes, hold deep cultural and ceremonial significance. It's a living heritage, not just ruins of the past.
Okay, a really deep indigenous history. Now let's pivot to when Europeans enter the picture. The Spanish were first, with Dominguez and Escalante.
1776, yeah. Their main goal was actually to find a route from Santa Fe in New Mexico to Monterey in California.
And they came through the Uinta Basin.
They did. But they absolutely relied on Ute guides. Men named Sylvestre and Joaquin were crucial. They knew the land, the water sources, and importantly, had the diplomatic skills to navigate interactions with different groups.
So the guides were essential.
Totally. They guided the Spanish across what's now Utah, near Dinosaur, through the Uinta Basin, along rivers like the Deschutes and Strawberry.
Did they make it to California?
No, they eventually had to turn back and return to Santa Fe via Arizona. But their expedition was significant.
How so?
They kept detailed journals, and one member, Miera y Pacheco, made maps. It was some of the earliest European documentation of the region. They wrote favorably about places like Utah Valley, and their route became a template for parts of what later became the Old Spanish Trail.
So they laid some groundwork. Then, a few decades later, the mountain men arrive.
Driven by beaver fur.
Exactly. The 1820s to the 1840s, the Uinta Mountains were prime beaver territory, so they became a major focus for trapping.
Big names involved.
Oh, yeah. Jedediah Smith, Peter Skeen Ogden, who worked for the British Hudson's Bay Company, Jim Bridger, Etienne Provost, Antoine Robidoux, they were all active here.
What were their relationships like with the Ute and Shoshone?
Complicated. There was definitely trade furs and provisions for European goods like guns, tools, beads. They held annual rendezvous, big gatherings in places like Cache Valley or Bear Lake. But there was also tension, competition, sometimes outright conflict. The trappers' presence definitely disrupted traditional life.
And it had ecological impacts, too. On the beavers, huge impacts. They trapped relentlessly. Ogden even wrote about intentionally creating a fur desert to discourage American competitors. Beaver populations plummeted.
And that affects the whole river ecosystem, right?
Absolutely. Beaver dams create wetlands, slow water flow, affect vegetation. Losing them has cascading effects. For Native Americans, it also meant depletion of a traditional resource and growing economic dependence on the fur trade, shifting their own ways of life.
But the mountain men also explored a lot.
Inadvertently, yes.
Oh.
While chasing beaver, they explored and mapped huge areas, figured out routes through mountains, like South Pass, which became vital for westward expansion. Their knowledge was invaluable later on.
Did they set up any permanent bases?
Semi-permanent. Trading posts like Fort Robidoux on the Uinta River, Fort Kit Carson. But the beaver trade itself started to decline by the 1840s.
Why? Just ran out of beaver.
Partly that, and also fashion changed back east and in Europe. Silk hats replaced beaver felt hats. But the door to the region had been pushed wide open.
Leading to the next phase, settlement. And initially, Mormon settlers weren't too keen on the Uinta Basin itself.
Right. That 1861 report called it valueless except for nomadic purposes. Kind of ironic, really.
Because soon after, it was designated an Indian reservation.
Exactly, by
Right.
presidential proclamation. And various Ute bands were then forcibly relocated there.
From where?
Bands displaced by Mormon settlement in places like Utah Valley and central Utah. The Treaty of Spanish Fork in 1865 formalized some of this. Later, the White River Utes were forced out of Colorado in 1881. They were all consolidated onto the Uinta and Ouray Reservation.
But settlement by non-natives continued anyway.
Despite the reservation status, yes. White ranchers, mostly Mormon, started using areas like the Ashley Valley for summer grazing in the 1870s. By the 1880s, there was a permanent Euro-American population and Uinta County was established.
What really pushed more settlement? Mineral.
That was a huge catalyst. The discovery of gilsonite, a unique type of asphalt in the 1880s, completely changed the perception of the basin's value.
Yeah.
Suddenly, it wasn't valueless anymore.
And that led to pressure to open the reservation.
Intense pressure, both locally and nationally. This tied into federal policies like the Dawes Act of 1887.
What did that do?
It aimed to break up tribal land ownership. It allotted small parcels of land to individual Native Americans and declared any surplus land open for public sale and settlement.
So parts of the reservation were opened.
Yes. The Uncompahgre part in 1898, the Uinta part in 1905. It triggered land rushes, thousands of people hoping to get a piece of land.
It sounds like a familiar pattern of dispossession.
Tragically common across the West, driven by economics, the idea of manifest destiny. By 1933, estimates suggest the Ute people had lost something like 91% of their original reservation lands.
So settlement booms and then resource extraction really ramps up. Timber, some mining, and that famous Lost Roads mine legend comes into play here too.
Exactly. The late 1800s and early 1900s saw major logging, especially on the North Slope. Mining within the Uintas proper was more limited, but the Lost Roads mine story adds this whole layer of myth and treasure hunting.
Tell me about that legend again.
It centers on Thomas Rhodes and later his son Caleb, Mormon pioneers in the mid-1800s. The story goes they were shown a super-rich gold mine hidden somewhere in the Uintas by Ute leaders, maybe Chief Walkara.
For the church.
Supposedly, the gold was for the benefit of the LDS Church. The location was kept secret, sometimes linked to older Spanish mines, or even ancient Native American treasures like Aztec gold or Book of Mormon relics.
Has anyone ever found it?
Nope. Countless searches, some famous treasure hunters like Mel Fisher got involved. There have been claims like Derry Holt's Josephine Mine, but the Forest Service dismissed those. It remains pure legend, but a powerful one, mixing history, religion, indigenous knowledge, and that lure of hidden wealth.
While the gold remained hidden, the timber was very real. You mentioned the North Slope logging and the phrase wooden beds for wooden heads.
Yeah, that points to the tie cutting industry. Huge demand for railroad cross ties after the Transcontinental Railroad went through in 1869.
And the Uintas had the trees.
The North Slope especially. Vast forests of lodgepole pine, perfect for ties. And crucially, it had rivers, the Bear, the Weber, Black's Fork, Henry's Fork, flowing north towards the railroad lines in Wyoming and Echo Canyon.
So they could float the ties downriver.
Exactly. It was tough, seasonal work. Guys would cut ties by hand with broad axes, mostly in winter. Then, during the spring melt, they'd drive the logs down the rivers, delivered them in the summer.
Who did this work?
Full-time loggers, but also lots of seasonal workers, farmers, sometimes whole families living in rough camps. The wooden beds for wooden heads inscription was apparently found in some camps, hinting at the hard, basic lifestyle.
Were there big companies involved?
Oh, yes. Early on, people supplied timber for Fort Bridger. Later, large companies like Levi Carter and General Isaac Coe became major players. The Hilliard Flume and Lumber Company built an incredible 30-mile flume to transport timber. It was a massive operation.
Must have changed the landscape.
Dramatically. Huge areas were cleared. It definitely altered the forests and contributed to the concerns about erosion and watershed damage that eventually led to creating forest reserves.
So timber was big business. What about actual mining in the Uintas, besides the legendary gold? Was there much?
Compared to other areas in Utah like Park City or Bingham Canyon, not really on a large scale for metals, the core geology, that Uinta Mountain group, isn't as favorable for big metallic ore deposits.
But some localized stuff.
Yeah, definitely. There are deposits of iron, copper, manganese, especially along that fault zone on the South Flank Iron Mine Creek area. The Carbonate District near Dyer Mountain had some copper, silver, lead, zinc, even a little gold. Minor copper was found up near Red Creek Canyon, associated with those older Red Creek quartzite rocks.
Anything else?
There's an interesting ornamental calcite called goldcite found near Blind Springs, but the real mineral wealth is in the Uinta Basin surrounding the mountains. Oil, gas, oil shale, gilsonite, uranium, phosphate, that's where the major extraction has happened.
So the mountains themselves, less so. The Rhodes legend kind of overshadows the actual, more modest mining history within the range itself.
Pretty much, yeah. It captures the imagination more than small copper claims.
Okay, moving towards more modern infrastructure, the Mirror Lake Scenic Byway, that seems like a really important route today.
Hugely important. State Route 150. It's the main paved road accessing the high western Uintas. Runs 78 miles from Camas, Utah, up over the pass and down to Evanston, Wyoming.
When was it built?
In stages. The first part, from Camas up towards the forest boundary, was designated back in 1933. Then, in 1953, it was extended past Mirror Lake to the Wyoming line.
And it's a scenic byway now.
Yep, a U.S. Forest Service scenic byway. Absolutely gorgeous drive. Passes through incredibly diverse ecosystems as it climbs.
What kind of ecosystems?
You start in sagebrush, move into aspen and conifer forests, past lakes, meadows, wetlands, all the way up towards the high peaks. It goes right through the heart of the Uinta-Wasatch National Forest for about 42 miles.
Does it go over a high pass?
It sure does. Bald Mountain Pass at 10,715 feet. Highest paved road in Utah.
Wow. Is it open year-round?
No, definitely not. Heavy snow closes a big section, usually from late fall or early winter until late spring or early summer. That closed section becomes a popular snowmobile route then.
So it balances access with the environment, and it's key for tourism.
Absolutely vital for recreation and for the economies of towns like Camas and Evanston. Driving the byway itself is free, but you do need passes for using trailheads and facilities within the national forest during the summer.
And speaking of the national forest, its creation was a big step too, wasn't it? The Uinta National Forest.
A landmark moment. The Uinta Forest Reserve, slightly different spelling initially, was established February 2010, 1897. It was Utah's very first forest reserve.
Why was it created? Just logging impacts?
That was a big part, but also overgrazing by livestock, concerns about mining impacts, and especially watershed protection. Unregulated use was causing serious erosion and flooding problems downstream.
Did local people support it?
Actually, yes. A lot of the push came from local communities, like the Provo Chamber of Commerce, who saw the long-term damage being done, especially to their water supplies.
So it wasn't just imposed from Washington.
No, there was significant local concern. It happened under the Forest Reserve Act of 1891, which gave the president power to set aside forest lands. This was part of the broader conservation movement gaining steam at the time.
People like Gifford Pinchot.
Exactly. Pinchot was a key figure advocating for scientific forestry, sustainable use, managing resources for the greatest good, for the greatest number in the long run.
So the reserves became national forests.
Right. In 1905, management moved to the Department of Agriculture under the new U.S. Forest Service, led by Pinchot. The name changed from Uinta to Uinta Reserve in 1906, and then in 1907 they were officially designated national forests.
Does the original Uinta National Forest still exist like that?
Not exactly. Over time, large parts of that original reserve were incorporated into the Ashley National Forest and the Wasatch National Forest. Today, they're largely managed together as the Uinta-Wasatch National Forest. But establishing that first reserve was the critical first step towards managing these lands sustainably.
Okay, so conservation efforts began over a century ago. Let's dive into the living wilds themselves now. The biodiversity sounds incredible.
It really is remarkable. The huge range in elevation from about 7,500 feet up to over 13,500 feet at Kings Peak, combined with the geology and different microclimates, creates this amazing mosaic of ecosystems.
From forests to tundra.
Exactly. montane forests, park-like meadows, wetlands, all the way up to alpine tundra. And each zone supports a different community of plants and animals, many with special adaptations for high altitudes.
And some rare species, too.
Definitely. The Uintas are a refuge for a number of rare and endemic species, meaning they're found pretty much only here. Conservation is a big focus because of that.
Let's walk up through those zones. What are the forests like?
At lower and mid elevations, you get these montane forests. Lots of conifers, lodgepole pine is very common. Also, Engelmann spruce, subalpine fir, Douglas fir, ponderosa pine can be found a bit lower, maybe 8,000, 9,000 feet. Soil type influences, which trees grow where.
Any deciduous trees?
Oh yeah, beautiful stands of aspen mixed in, especially vibrant in the fall, and some gamble oak too. The Mirror Lake Byway Drive really showcases this forest diversity.
And higher up, before the trees disappear.
You get these wonderful open meadows, often filled with wildflowers in summer, and lush wetlands along streams and lakes. Really important habitats for grazing animals like elk and deer, and just biodiversity hotspots.
Then you hit the tree line. Alpine tundra.
Right, usually around 10,500 to 11,000 feet. The High Uintas Wilderness actually contains the largest continuous chunk of alpine tundra in the whole Intermountain West.
What's it like up there? Harsh.
Very harsh. Extremely cold winters, a super short growing season, maybe only 45 to 90 days, strong winds, thin rocky soils. Some areas might even have permafrost.
What can even grow there?
Tough, low-growing stuff. Grasses, sedges, especially carex species, hardy flowering plants called forbs, dwarf shrubs like tiny willows and heaths, and tons of lichens and mosses clinging to rocks.
Any weird landscape features?
Yeah, you see things like patterned ground, rock streams, terraces formed by soil creep due to freeze-thaw cycles, solifluction. It's a really unique landscape.
And it's fragile.
Extremely fragile. These plants are barely hanging on, highly adapted to the severe conditions. They're very vulnerable to disturbance, whether it's from climate change, altering snowpack and temperature, or impacts from recreation.
You mentioned botanical jewels earlier.
Yeah.
Are there plants found only in the Uintas?
Yes, several endemic species. The Uintas have been this isolated, high-elevation island for long enough that unique plants have evolved here or survived here when they disappeared elsewhere.
Like what? Any examples?
Sure. There's Maguire's primrose, Primula maguire, found on specific moist limestone cliffs. Rydberg's paria, Paria rydbergi, a mustard family member in the alpine tundra. The Uinta poppy, Papaverendensis, a beautiful yellow flower. Uinta basin evening primrose, Anothera acutissima. Utah evesia, Evesia utahensis, on rocky outcrops.
And they're all specialized.
Very much so. Adapted to specific tiny niches, certain rock types, soil, moisture levels, elevation zones. That specialization makes them really vulnerable.
But grazing, climate change.
All of the above. Livestock grazing and trampling, impacts from off-road vehicles in some areas, competition from invasive weeds, and definitely the changing climate altered snowmelt, drought, warmer temperatures. Protecting these rare plants is a big challenge for the Forest Service.
Makes sense. Okay, what about the animals? Big mammals.
Good populations of elk and mule deer. Moose are doing well too, especially in the wetter, willow-rich areas. You've got mountain goats introduced, but thriving in the high rocky zones, and native bighorn sheep clinging to the rugged terrain. Black bears are definitely around, mountain lions too, coyotes are common, all playing their role.
Smaller critters.
Lots. Various ground squirrels and chipmunks. Yellow-bellied marmots are classic alpine residents. You see them sunning on rocks. Pikas, those little relatives of rabbits, live in the talus slopes. Beavers and river otters in the streams and lakes. Pine martens in the forests.
Birds must be diverse too, with all those habitats.
Exceptionally diverse. It's estimated the High Uintas Wilderness alone supports about 75% of all bird species found in Utah.
Wow. Any highlights?
Raptors like bald and golden eagles, various hawks and falcons, owls including great horned owls and the more elusive boreal owl. White-tailed ptarmigan are specialists of the alpine tundra, changing plumage with the seasons. And then countless songbirds, woodpeckers, waterfowl near the lakes.
Fish, native trout.
Yep, the lakes and streams have native Bonneville and Colorado River cutthroat trout, which are species of concern. Also mountain whitefish, mountain suckers, mottled sculpin.
Amphibians.
Yep.
Reptiles.
Amphibians include the boreal toad, another species facing challenges, tiger salamanders, spadefoots, chorus frogs, leopard frogs, Columbia spotted frogs. Reptile diversity drops off significantly at higher, colder elevations, but you'll find some snakes and lizards lower down.
It's a whole complex web. And with more people visiting, managing that interaction is key.
Crucial. Understanding wildlife needs, minimizing human impact, it's an ongoing balancing act.
Let's talk more about those species of concern. The Canada lynx. Are they still in the Uintas?
That's a big question mark. They are federally listed as threatened. They need dense forests with lots of snowshoe hares, their main food. Historically, they were likely here. The last confirmed record, though, was way back in 1982.
So maybe gone from the Uintas?
It's possible they're extirpated or perhaps present in extremely low numbers, just undetected. The lack of recent sightings makes it really hard to say for sure. Habitat changes from logging, roads, and potentially climate change affecting snowpack and hare populations are the main threats.
And the boreal toad. You mentioned challenges.
Yeah, they're a Utah species of greatest conservation need and Forest Service sensitive. Once pretty common in high elevation wetlands, but they've seen major declines everywhere, including the Uintas.
Why? Disease.
That's a huge factor. Chytridiomycosis, a fungal disease devastating amphibian populations worldwide, but also habitat disturbance from livestock, recreation, pollution, drought, climate change. It's a tough combination.
Is anything being done?
Yes, there's active conservation, monitoring populations, research into the disease, trying to protect habitat. And there are captive breeding efforts, like at Salt Lake's Hobel Zoo, working with DWR and the Forest Service, potentially for future reintroductions.
Yep. And the native cutthroat trout, Colorado River cutthroats.
Right. Native to the Uintas on the Colorado River side of the divide. They've also declined significantly.
Same reasons. Habitat, non-natives.
Primarily competition and hybridization with non-native trout like brook, brown, and rainbow trout that were stocked extensively in the past. And habitat degradation played a role too.
Are the Uintas important for them now?
Hugely important. They represent some of the best remaining habitat and purest populations. There are intensive restoration projects underway.
Like what?
Using fish toxins like rotenone to carefully remove the non-native fish from entire stream sections or lake systems. Then they reintroduce genetically pure Colorado River cutthroats.
Where is this happening?
Specific projects have targeted places like Oweep Creek, South Fork Sheep Creek, Carter Creek. The goal is to create secure havens where the native trout can thrive without competition, hopefully preventing them from needing Endangered Species Act protection.
Sounds like really intensive hands-on work.
It is. Requires a lot of effort and collaboration between agencies like the DWR and Forest Service.
Any other species of note facing challenges?
The boreal owl is another one listed as a species of greatest conservation need in Utah. Lives in high elevation forests, very nocturnal and secretive, so we actually don't know that much about its status here. More research needed.
So overall conservation involves habitat work, species-specific recovery, land management.
And research, absolutely. The Forest Service manages the land through the Uinta Wasatch Cache and Ashley National Forests. They do projects addressing grazing impacts, reforestation, removing hazardous trees in busy areas like Mirror Lake, sometimes even realigning roads to reduce erosion.
Dealing with broader threats, too, like fire.
Yeah, wildfire risk is a concern, especially with dense forests, may be impacted by beetle kill in some areas. They use tools like prescribed burning or mechanical thinning to try and make forests more resilient and protect waterfeds. Invasive plants are another ongoing battle, and overarching all of it is climate change.
So ongoing research is key.
Vital. Things like precipitation studies at USU, adaptive management learning as you go, it all helps refine how we protect this incredible place. Public awareness and stewardship are critical, too.
Absolutely. Okay, let's shift gears one last time. The Uintas also have this mystique, right? The unexplained, the legends.
They definitely do. That vast wilderness, the ruggedness, the unpredictable weather, it's fertile ground for mysteries and legends. Stories of people vanishing without a trace, whispers of lost treasure, even strange creatures.
The Uinta Triangle idea, like the Bermuda Triangle.
Yeah, you hear that sometimes. Or the Bermuda Triangle of the Utah backcountry. While many incidents likely have natural explanations, falls, weather, getting lost, some cases remain genuinely baffling and fuel that reputation.
Which cases stand out?
Lynn Simmons, the surveyor in 1940, Garrett Bardsley, the young scout in 2004, Melvin Heaps, the older hiker in 2017, and Eric Robinson, the Australian trekker who disappeared in 2011, though his remains were eventually found years later.
Tell me about Lynn Simmons again, 1940.
He was surveying near Lamont Peak, high elevation, over 12,700 feet, disappeared during a storm on September 4th, last seen heading down towards camp. Rugged, cliffy terrain, a big search, over 100 people for 2 months found nothing. Bad weather hampered it. Records got lost over time, but KSL reinvestigated recently and the sheriff's office reopened the case. Still missing.
And Garrett Bardsley, The 12-year-old.
Disappeared August 20th, 2004, near Cubrant Lake. He was just walking 150 yards back to camp from fishing to change wet shoes. Father thought he heard him call out. Massive 10-day search, hundreds of people, helicopters, dogs, nothing. Theories abound, but no evidence of abduction or animal attack was found. Just vanished. He remains listed as missing. His family started a humanitarian foundation in his name.
And Melvin Heaps in 2017.
74, experienced hiker, familiar with the Crystal Lake area, went for a day hike July 31st, never returned, car at trailhead. Another big search. He was hearing impaired. Dense forest, no communication, no sign ever found. Still an open missing person case.
Eric Robinson, the Australian hiker. His case had a resolution, but a grim one.
Right. He disappeared hiking the Highline Trail in summer 2011. Started July 28th, expected finish August 7th. Never showed up. Huge search found nothing initially. Then, 5 years later, in August 2016, hikers found his skeletal remains and gear near Alsop Lake, about 10 miles from his last sighting. Looks like he fell down a steep boulder field, a very sad end, highlighting how vast and challenging that terrain is.
Common factors seem to be the terrain, weather, maybe getting disoriented.
Definitely. It's vast, easy to get turned around in the forests and basins. Weather can change in an instant, and altitude adds its own challenges.
Beyond the disappearances, what about the more folkloric legends? Lost Roads Mine is the big one.
The most famous, for sure. That persistent story of hidden Ute or Spanish gold shown to the Rhodes family for the Mormon Church. Tied up with Aztec treasure, Book of Mormon legends. Fuels treasure hunters to this day, despite zero proof. It really embodies that idea of hidden riches in the wild.
Any cryptids, Bigfoot, lake monsters.
You get Bigfoot stories, like everywhere else. More specific is the Moon Lake monster, Mooney. Moon Lake is up around 8,300 feet. People report seeing something like a giant serpent or a bumpy log, V-shaped ripples, sometimes tied to Ute legends about the lake being cursed or bottomless, or a ghost story about a drowned girl.
And Skinwalker Ranch isn't far right. Does that add to the weirdness vibe?
It definitely contributes to the whole Uinta Basin's reputation for high strangeness. The ranch, historically Ute land, has this notorious history of UFOs, cattle mutilations, weird creatures, poltergeist activity, all officially unexplained despite investigations. Access is restricted now. Whether connected or not, it adds to the overall mystery surrounding the region. There are even vague rumors about a crashed UFO near Fort Duchesne.
Wow. So a mix of real danger, unsolved disappearances, and deep-rooted folklore. It all adds to the Uinta's character.
It certainly does. Provokes wonder, maybe a bit of fear, a sense of the unknown.
So bringing it all together to today, the Uintas are clearly a cherished place.
Immensely cherished. Millions visit annually, drawn by the incredible scenery, the lakes, the wilderness feel.
Recreation is huge.
Unparalleled opportunities. Hiking, backpacking, fishing, camping, climbing, skiing, horse riding, you name it.
But that popularity brings challenges. Conservation is still key.
Absolutely. Protecting the ecosystems, the sensitive species, managing visitor impact, it's a constant focus. The Uintas offer solitude and adventure, but need careful stewardship.
Let's quickly run through some of those activities: hiking and backpacking.
Tons of trails, over 545 miles just in the high Uintas wilderness. The Highline Trail is the epic 104-mile traverse, but countless day hikes and shorter backpacking loops too. Bald Mountain, Mirror Lake Loop, Lofty Lake Loop, Red Castle, Amethyst Lake, Henry's Fork, so many classics.
Any quieter options?
Sure, places like Haystack Lake, Fair Lake, Shingle Creek Trail might see fewer people, or pushing into more remote basins requires more effort but offers more solitude.
Fishing. Sounds like paradise.
Pretty close. Over 1,000 lakes, hundreds of miles of streams. Fly fishing is huge. Native cutthroats, introduce brookies, browns, rainbows, tigers, even grayling and golden trout in specific spots. Mirror Lake, Upper Provo, Ashley Creek drainage, Bear River drainage, countless opportunities from roadside lakes to hike-in gems.
Camping.
Yeah.
Developed and primitive.
Both. Lots of Forest Service campgrounds, especially along Mirror Lake Highway, many reservable. Plus, dispersed camping is allowed in much of the forest for those who want a more rustic experience. Just gotta follow. Leave no trace. Mirror Lake Campground is iconic, but dozens of others exist.
What else? Climbing. Winter sports.
Yep, rock climbing on the quartzite Ruth Lake, Hayden Peak areas, kayaking and canoeing on the lakes. Backcountry skiing and snowmobiling are huge in winter when the highway closes. Horsepacking is popular. Hunting for elk and deer is managed by the state. OHV riding on designated trails outside wilderness, something for everyone.
Besides the main peaks and lakes, any unique geological spots or hidden natural features people should look out for?
Definitely keep an eye out for those Uinta Mountain Group cliffs, the reddish Red Creek quartzite in the northeast, those limestone gateways along some rivers, all the glacial features, cirques, U-shaped valleys. And south of the mountains, Fantasy Canyon is a wild, bizarre, eroded sandstone. Looks like another planet.
And lesser-known trails for escaping crowds.
Exploring the more remote lake basins is key for backpackers seeking solitude. Places like Naturalist Basin, while popular, has multiple lakes. Red Castle area is remote. Amethyst Basin. Checking local guides or backpacking forums can uncover quieter trails too.
Lastly, any specific historical events or news reports that really capture the Uinta story over the last century or so?
Well, the early surveys by Powell, King, Hayden were foundational. The dinosaur discoveries near Jensen in 1909 were huge news. Tragic events like the 1965 Sheep Creek flash flood stand out. Severe winters like 1948-49 had major impacts. Wildfires have always been a factor, influencing the creation of the forest reserve. And those search and rescue operations for missing people, sadly, are a recurring part of the Uinta story, often getting significant local media coverage, even if national attention fades.
It really paints a picture of a landscape that's both beautiful and demanding, shaping human history here for millennia. So, wrapping up this deep dive, what are the main takeaways?
I think it's the Uinta's uniqueness, that geology dictating the east-west trend, the incredible depth of human history, adaptation after adaptation, the profound changes brought by European contact and resource use, the stunning biodiversity born from elevation, and the critical need for ongoing conservation, and of course those persistent mysteries and the sheer recreational draw it holds today.
Yeah, definitely some aha moments connecting those ancient geological events to the mountains we see or understanding the sequence of cultures. Hopefully for you listening, this gives a much deeper appreciation next time you see the Uintas on a map or visit in person.
Absolutely. And it leaves us with a final thought, a question for you to consider. We've seen the Uintas shaped by immense natural forces and centuries of human activity. Facing modern pressures like climate change and increasing use, what element of this range's legacy, its geology, its history, its ecology, its wildness, its cultural ties, what do you think is the most critical thing to protect and carry forward? How do we balance all these interconnected values?
That's a great question to ponder. The interconnectedness is key. And if any specific part of our conversation sparked your interest, the Fremont rock art, the Laramide orogeny, the boreal toad conservation, the unsolved disappearances, there's always more to learn. The Uintas have plenty more stories to tell.